All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson, and today, so excited to have on the show here Dr. Gabor Maté. Dr. Maté, you ready to go?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So Dr. Maté has over 20 years of family practice and palliative care experience. He's worked for 12 years in Vancouver's downtown Eastside with patients challenged by hardcore drug addiction, mental illness, and HIV. Dr. Maté is a sought-after speaker and teacher throughout North America. He's written several best-selling books, including the award-winning In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction, as well as When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress. He's also the co-founder of Compassion for Addiction, a new nonprofit that focuses on addiction. Finally, Dr. Maté has received numerous awards, among them the Hubert Evans Prize for Literary Nonfiction, an honorary law degree from the University of Northern British Columbia, and an Outstanding Alumnus Award from Simon Fraser University. All right, Dr. Maté, obviously just a snippet of your background. Share with our listeners where you're calling from, for example, and then let's dive into it.
Well, I live and have worked in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And as you mentioned in the introduction, I was in family practice for many years. I worked in palliative care, looking after terminally ill people, and then with Vancouver's downtown Eastside, which is North America's most concentrated area of drug use. And what unifies all of my work is what I've come to understand, that whether we're talking about addiction, mental illness, or physical illnesses like cancer and autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, scleroderma, colitis, Crohn's disease, chronic fatigue, we're looking in each case at the effects of childhood trauma.
So as we kind of move in here, share with our listeners maybe a kind of a guiding insight that has influenced your work, maybe a mantra or a quote. I mean, you've been doing this for a while. Share with our listeners something that kind of has inspired you in the work that you do.
I don't know if I have a ready answer for that question. What I can tell you is that I've learned that the idea held by traditional Western medicine, such as I was trained in, that people are isolated, separate entities, and that diseases are unfortunate and usually unexplainable manifestations of bad luck, is simply not true. That human beings are intensely connected from conception till death to other human beings and to the universe, actually, and that we can't understand the individual without understanding his or her relationships with the environment in which they have grown up in and have worked in. Nor can we understand people by separating the mind and the body. It's all one unity, and only by understanding that unity can we make sense of human experience and human illness.
So, obviously, again, as we talked a little bit about before we started recording here, people who are listening to this podcast are therapists of different disciplines. They are consumers of treatment. And, what I like about what you're saying, and really, I think one of the things that first kind of inspired me when I heard you speak is that, in a sense, it sounded as if you were also asking the question,
Annapolis, your teeth.
What is going on here? It's not that there is So much so, there's an etiology here. There's a causative factor that maybe we're not looking at, that maybe we're refusing to look at. Speak to that a bit, I guess.
Well, it's timing that you should ask me that, because I'm just writing my next book, the title of which is Toxic Culture, Illness, Trauma, and Healing in a Materialistic World. And the second chapter of the book is actually on the medical ideology. And we think of medicine as a science, as a rigorous discipline, but in fact, and it has some aspects of that for sure, but it's also an ideology. And ideology is a point of view that's often unconscious, but which limits our capacity to see the world. In other words, the ideology has certain assumptions built into it that the people who are affected by the ideology don't necessarily see, but those assumptions shape and limit what they can see and understand. Now, the first assumption in the Western medical ideology is that you can separate mind from the body, and that the causes of most medical problems are therefore strictly biological. So if it's addiction, it's a genetic, biological brain problem. If it's cancer, it's a physiological problem, pure and simple. And if it's depression, it's lack of serotonin. Let's increase the amount of serotonin biologically by giving out pills. So this separation of mind and body. And then the second assumption in the medical ideology would be the separation of the individual from the environment. So many studies have shown, for example, that children whose parents are stressed are much more likely to have asthma. In other words, the parents' emotional states affect the lung functioning of the individual, of the child. But we don't see that in medicine. We just think asthma is a physical problem, isolated individual. I can go on,
Right. So if we were to kind of frame this from the perspective of an individual who's working with clients who've been traumatized, a therapist, say, what's the take home here for them, would you say?
Well, first of all, again, we're in sync here, because the next assumption that I would have listed about the medical ideology is that it fails to deal with trauma as a key precursor to health problems later on in life. And yet, all kinds of epidemiological and scientific literature shows that early trauma, beginning actually trauma to the pregnant woman while the infant is still in utero, and then early childhood trauma has a huge impact on potentiating the risk of cancer, mental illness, addiction, and so on. So that whatever we're looking at adult illness, we're actually dealing with the long-term impacts of trauma.
And if as a culture, we're not willing or able to look at trauma, then we have a continuing issue on our hands.
Well, and as in a culture, we're not. And as a medical culture, we're not. I mean, I lecture to medical students, and I speak to across North America to a lot of people. And I can tell you that to this day, trauma, except in the sense of specific and limited physical trauma, is never talked about in medical school. So most physicians never hear the perspective that the cancer that they're looking at, or the chronic pain that they're looking at, maybe has a significant traumatic component in its remote origins. And most physicians never hear that perspective at all.
And why is that?
Even though, for example, there's a Canadian study a couple of years ago that showed that if you were abused as a child, your risk of cancer goes up. Your risk of cancer goes up nearly 50%. And there's all kinds of physiological reasons for that. It's not just sort of a fancy psychological connection. It's the body that's being affected, and right from the beginning. So why is that? Well, it's because, first of all, there's the ideology of any major institution in a society will reflect the ideology of the society as a whole. And the dominant ideology in our culture is a materialistic one, where people are valued only for what they can consume or produce. And in a context like that, we don't really care about human experience that much. We just care about human functionality.
and trauma being on kind of the far end of human experience continuum, right? Being something people really don't want to talk about, don't want to face, don't want to admit. I know from my own experience that, still to this day, a lot of therapists are, for a variety of reasons, don't want to look at trauma, don't want to ask about it when they're, conducting an interview, so to speak.
I was interviewing a woman for the book yesterday. She's from North Dakota. She said thyroid disease. She said part of a colon removed or small bowel removed because of Crohn's disease. She said diverticulitis. She was sexually molested by her stepfather from age 4 to 14. Nobody ever asked her about that. Nobody. In all the years of medical problems, nobody ever asked her. And typically, when I talk to people with illness or addictions, when I was working in addictions, in 14 years of addictions work, I did not meet a single female patient in the downtown Eastside of Vancouver who had not been sexually abused. And yet, most addiction physicians don't talk about trauma at all. They don't see the significance of it, and they're not comfortable raising the topic of it. And largely because they think that all of us are to some degree traumatized in our society. And some of us get into the helping professions precisely to get away from our own trauma.
Yeah.
And these therapists that you mentioned that won't ask about it, it's because they're not comfortable with their own pain. They haven't dealt with it. They're afraid of what it'll trigger for them.
And then the question here then is, to what degree can you be helpful? Right?
You can be as helpful. You can guide people along a road precisely to the point that you've come yourself. That's it. And not a step further. And those therapists that haven't dealt with their trauma can help the patients in a very limited, or clients in a very limited fashion. Those therapists that have dealt with their trauma but are stuck in it, and I know therapists like that too, who've dealt with their trauma, but in other words, they've looked at it, but they're stuck in it. They still perceive themselves as victims of it. They can also only take people only so far, because ultimately you have to be able to go to the trauma, but you also have to be able to guide people past it. And you have to have done that for yourself. If you haven't done either of those, you can only take people so far, no matter how good your intentions are, and no matter how committed you are.
Dr. Maté, how did you get here? What got you into this field, into the specialization and interest?
Well, as anybody who's read my books will know, I've had my own issues. I've had my own addiction issues. I've had my own workaholism issues. I've had my own issues of repressing my feelings, which is a major risk factor for disease. So partly it happened through me dealing with my own stuff, having to go for treatment and therapy and having to continue, and I still have to continue the path of self-awareness, self-knowledge, and curious, compassionate self-investigation. Number one. Number two, as a physician, if your eyes are open, you can't help but notice it. And once you notice it, it just shows up everywhere. So that once you recognize the connection between early childhood experience and later manifestations, physical or mental, of ill health, you can't ignore it anymore. And so, and then thirdly, once you open your mind to these possibilities, then there's this vast body of literature that leaves it beyond any shadow of doubt that trauma is a significant factor in all manner of health conditions. So that whether it's my personal experience as an individual, whether it's the travails of my children, where I've had to look at my own parenting and how did I pass on my trauma to them, whether it's what I noticed as a physician working with dying people in palliative care with cancer and so on, or whether it's my addiction work, they all ended up pointing me in this direction.
So I'm really curious about the conviction with which you speak about almost uncovering the patina of the issue here. The issue here being trauma. I mean, you speak with a lot of conviction, with a lot of directness, and did that level of conviction and directness? Were you involved with your own addictions, as you call them, with that same level of conviction? In a sense, I mean, was it hard for you to look at yourself and say, you know what, there's something going on here, and not just address it, but then to bring that into your professional arena?
It was years for me to recognize that I had addictive tendencies and just how destructive they were, and it was years after I recognized them that I was able to let go of them. I was in denial for a long time. And this is even after I saw some things about addiction very clearly. I still had trouble seeing that, well, yeah, buddy, you're part of this syndrome as well, you know, and even after recognizing it, I could write about it and speak about it very articulately, but I still couldn't give it up.
So as we kind of shift here in this interview, I'm wondering if you can share with the listeners here an early kind of clinical error you made, and share with us what you learned from that. Obviously, you know, people make a lot of mistakes. We as clinicians make a lot of errors. I mean, one of the reasons why I got into this field was my brother came back from Iraq as a special forces guy with PTSD, and I was so excited to talk to him, but I just bugged him and tried to really force him to talk about his experiences. And this was, many years before I knew what was going on with PTSD and so forth. And I blew it. And that was kind of my mistake. But share with us, Dr. Maté, a story of maybe an early clinical error you made.
Well, first of all, you can't force anybody into this conversation. You can invite them, but you can't force them into it. And there were similar cases with me when I had a certain insight. All of a sudden, I wanted to push those insights onto my clients, and people just ended up leaving me. They didn't want to come back because I wasn't compassionate. It's not compassionate to force somebody into a conversation they're not ready to have. Doesn't matter how true it is what you're saying. It's not compassionate to coerce the conversation. And of course, as a physician, I'm in a position of some degree of authority. So patients have trouble telling to my face that they're not comfortable with what I'm talking about. So it took me a while to learn that it's one thing to have the knowledge and the insight. It's another to communicate it in such a way that people have the option of not taking it on, or of taking it on if they want to. And that, did result in some people legitimately resenting me.
So one of the questions I have here is, what keeps you going in this work day to day? I mean, obviously it's challenging work, even bringing up the whole topic of trauma, and it's not easy. I mean, you shared a little bit about, your own history, and of course, as you've written about it so eloquently in your books, but what keeps you going? I mean, you're starting a new book as well, but what keeps you going, Dr. Maté, day to day?
I took part in a workshop a couple of weeks ago. When I say I took part in it, I was a participant in it because I need to keep doing the work myself. And this very question came up, and I realized that seeking for truth is part of my nature. Actually, it's part of everybody's nature, and whether we're open to it or not. And secondly, sharing the truth is also so. Truth seeking and sharing is actually very close. They're at my very essence, actually. Not to say I do it well all the time. Not to say that I don't betray my own principles sometimes as a human being. Of course I do. But seeking the truth. What is the actual truth of things? What's actually going on? How do we explain? Like as an infant of the Nazi genocide, which I was, the question of how do these things happen, and why are human beings capable of hurting each other and of suffering so much, that's been a central question in my life. And so seeking the truth and then sharing it as I find it is just, they're very close to me. And people want that. I mean, this coming week, I'll be going to an Indian reservation in Canada where there have been dozens of overdose deaths due to addiction in the last few months. And they really wanted the help. And just this last week in Canada, there was a big report by a government commission on the impact of the residential schools, which are forced institutions where Native kids were robbed from their parents, literally kidnapped by the police under the law. And where Native kids were taken to for 100 years, generation after generation, where they were abused physically and sexually and spiritually and in every way you can imagine. And the impact of that is that although Native Canadians make up 3-4% of the population, they make up 30% of the jail population, and they have much higher rates of addiction and disease and so on. And you couldn't have a better, or I should say more tragic, clearer laboratory example of the impact of multi-generational trauma on a population. But as a physician, I know these things, and I've done the research, and I can articulate them in a way that actually people find liberating. When I go there next week, I know there'll be hundreds of people there, and even though they've suffered these things, they still blame themselves for their addiction and their dysfunction. When they hear me speak, they'll say, well, okay, it's our responsibility, but it's not our fault. And it's our responsibility, how do we deal with it now? But it's not our fault that it happened. So it's tremendously satisfying work that I do, in helping people understand their experience, and also telling them that, well, it happened to you, but you're not the victim of it. You're not necessarily stuck in it. There's things you can do to liberate yourself from the past. You're not defined by what happened to you in childhood. You're not defined by what happened to your grandparents. You're not just a survivor. It's inspiring work. I'm constantly inspired by people, whether it's the woman I spoke to yesterday from North Dakota who, with her own trauma, you know what she does? She helps to protect Native kids from abuse. Tremendously inspiring. Her suffering led her to now work very hard to protect children from suffering like she did.
Yeah. I mean, it's really inspiring to me as well. And I think, I remember I was in a training, for, my doctoral program a while ago, and they showed a video of yours. And the take home message for me was basically wake up, yeah. And that's what I'm hearing, when you say you're seeking for truth and sharing the truth. Dr. Maté, I want you, if you could, I want to invite you to share some advice for, clinicians, therapists, trauma workers who are just getting into this field. What would you say to them?
May I say something before?
Of course.
I want to come back to your brother, if I may, if I could.
Yeah, sure.
But only to the degree that you're comfortable with it. You wanted him to talk about his experience, right? Oh,
I pushed him. I did everything the wrong way, yeah.
No, so why do you think you did that?
Why did I want to hear about his experience?
Yeah. Why did you push him, do you think?
Because he wasn't talking. He was really quiet. He's a retired SEAL. So I was just excited about his adventures and I wanted to hear it. I almost wanted to live vicariously in a sense.
Okay, so look, I got it. He was silent, but what was your urgency about it?
My agency was...
Urgency.
My urgency, I think, to maybe communicate with him, to share in his experience.
Why did you have that urgency?
I don't know. I mean, there was an urgency. There was this impatience.
Frustration on your part.
There was frustration. Yeah.
What were you frustrated about?
I think because we weren't communicating.
You weren't, but what were you frustrated about?
That I wasn't getting the rush from hearing him talk, or the rush from hearing him share his experiences, or what I imagine those experiences might be.
Okay. And you were desperate to help him, right?
Well, at the time, I don't know if I was at the time, this was before I really knew about PTSD and psychology. I wasn't so much interested in helping him at the time. I didn't know he had PTSD at the time, but he certainly did. And he certainly wasn't or couldn't speak about his experiences.
And something about that frustrated you?
Oh, it really frustrated me. It really did.
So let me suggest to you something. That this had nothing to do with him being a SEAL or any of that. It went way back. That this frustration that you had about not communicating, would this have been the first time in your life that you felt that?
No.
Okay, how far does it go back?
Probably years. I don't know. It feels like years.
I bet you could take it back to your childhood.
Probably.
In other words, you were trying to resolve something from your childhood to your brother. And I would also say about your brother, this idea that people get PTSD because they have these wartime experiences. Well, it's not that it's not true, but it's not complete. Because when you actually look at the people who have these experiences and have PTSD, it usually triggers something for them that happened in childhood. So your brother's problems began long before he became a Navy SEAL. And so did yours, as a matter of fact. In other words, what was being reenacted here was something for each of you, your childhood experience. Maybe your parents suffered and you felt helpless in the face of it. Maybe in your family there was no talking. Maybe there was no sharing. Maybe that frustrated you all along. Maybe you yourself had not learned how to really share about yourself. I don't know what's going on. I don't mean to analyze your family too deeply here, but all I'm suggesting is, and you ask me what's the message to other people? What's the message to be? The message is that it's never about what we think it's about. The message is that it always has deep origins in our beginnings, and that's where we need to go. And not that we go there in order to show others or to ourselves that we're somehow victimized by it, but precisely as long as we don't work it out, as long as we don't look at it, we can't liberate ourselves from it.
Yeah, well, I'm sitting here thinking that you hit the nail on the head, actually. Yeah. I appreciate that.
There's only one nail. It's not hard to hit.
Well, yeah, it's true. Yeah. And I think, therein lies, I think, a nugget of advice, certainly for all of us who are doing this work. And, yeah.
So again, I think what I get from this experience and what I'd say to people is, I know you weren't a therapist at the time, so you were not playing that role, you were not in that mode, but our own reactions to our clients and our own frustrations and our own judgments and emotions are our best guide to what's going on, as long as we pay attention to them. So it's never about the other person. And whenever there is any kind of a frustration or emotion on our part, we have to deal with that. Otherwise, we can't help the other person. So that the only way to do this work is to continue to grow in it and to continue to allow our clients to teach us. so that we can teach them, actually.
So what I hear you saying is you're talking about a great self-awareness, almost a raw self-awareness, and only to the degree that we were willing to do that, to move forward in that, we will be able to begin to help or guide the people sitting in the room with us.
Sometimes in my lectures, I don't do clinical work so much anymore. I'm too busy traveling, speaking, and then writing my next book and leading some healing retreats every once in a while. But sometimes I ask, what do you call somebody who tries to resolve in another person that trauma which they haven't resolved in themselves? The answer, of course, is psychiatrist,
Mm-hmm.
And which is not true of all psychiatrists, but it's true for all of us, that we, including myself, is that there's a great tendency to hide behind our professional roles and to think that because we've got an academic knowledge and a degree and a position and certain credentials, that therefore we don't have to deal with what's actually going on with us as people.
Mm-hmm.
But really, the really great therapists are not the ones with degrees necessarily. I mean, degrees don't hurt, but in themselves, they don't guarantee anything whatsoever. There's all kinds of people with all kinds of letters after their names who are totally inept at helping others, simply because they haven't dealt with their own stuff.
You talked about, and I don't want to simplify this, but, before you kind of were looking at your own issues, your own addictions, and then after that, how did you experience a shift for yourself as a clinician or as a physician in the way that you worked with individuals?
There was no. It really had to do with the degree to which I dealt with my own stuff, and there was no sudden shift ever. There's been a gradual, and there continues to be a gradual, I would say, relaxation, actually, a gradual comfort with trauma, no matter what shape it has taken in people's lives. When I say comfort, I mean that the more I see that people can transcend it and go past it and incorporate it and integrate it, the less dramatic the whole thing becomes. And so there's been sort of an ongoing positive shift towards being able to look at anything with full faith that an individual has the capacity to grow past it and to fulfill themselves.
As we kind of wind down here, Dr. Maté, I'm wondering if you'd be able to share with our listeners a book that's inspired you or guided you, and that that could be professionally related or not. Well,
I hope I can mention a couple. The initial ones that opened my eyes to the impact of childhood trauma were, of course, the books of Alice Miller, the Drama of the Gifted Child, and other books that she wrote. More recently, when I say more recently, I mean after Miller, I began to read the work of the California-based spiritual teacher and therapist A.H. Almaas, A-L-M-A-A-S, and his understanding of how the personality develops as a protection against childhood pain, and how that then manifests in emotional and spiritual dysfunction, have been absolutely instructive and inspiring to me.
And what was his name again?
Almaas, A-L-M-A-A-S. His real name is Hamid Ali, but his writer's name is Almaas, A-L-M-A-A-S. He's just a seminal thinker when it comes to psychology and spirituality. The work of my friend Peter Levine on trauma. Peter Levine wrote Waking the Tiger, and most recently, In an Unspoken Voice, which are great books on trauma. I wrote the foreword for the last one, and Peter and I will be working on this book I'm writing now, Toxic Culture, together. The work of Bessel van der Kolk, K-O-L-K. His most recent book is The Body Keeps the Score. Great, internationally renowned trauma expert. The works on brain development of Alan Shore and Daniel Siegel from Los Angeles. So there are many, many books I could mention. I can't say one. Some of them are more informative than inspirational. Others are more inspirational than informative. But actually, that's not true. If it's not informative, it's not inspirational either. But all of these works, I would say, it's in that set of books, if you're going to talk about books, that I found much of my own orientation.
Okay. So we've got Alice Miller, Peter Levine, of course, Bessel van der Kolk, and the works of Alan Shore. All these will be up at the show notes page at westcoasttraumaproject.com, along with your books and links to your website. Dr. Maté, what's the best way for people to find out about you or get in contact with you?
It's through the website.
Okay.
On the website, there are many of my YouTube lectures available, which are freely. There's no charge to see any of that stuff. Chapters of my books can be downloaded. Interviews can be read or listened to. My speaking events are listed there.
Okay.
My blog, twice a year I write something or other. I don't have time to write a blog. So pretty much everything that anybody would want to know about me professionally is on that website.
Awesome. In addition, we talked a little bit before we started recording here about August 14th, you'll be in California at Berkeley through the Naroja Center at the Marriott there. Again, we'll have this linked up. Dr. Maté, again, it's been an honor to have you on here and to share this time with you. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
All right, sir. Take care.
Take care. You too. Bye-bye.